Hi everybody, welcome to GTCoding. I have combined all the videos in our CRUD application using Next.js and AppWrite series into this single long video so that it's easy for you to follow. Now in this video, we're going to design this simple CRUD application using Next.js and AppWrite. And I will also show you how to deploy this on Vercel. And I will also leave the link of the source code in the description of this video. So let's get started. In this tutorial series, I'm going to show you how to create this simple CRUD application using Next.js and AppWrite. Now we are not going to add any user authentication in this application. We'll just take a look at the CRUD operations, which are create, read, update, and delete. And we're going to use AppWrite to store this data. Now in this first video, I'll just show you the demo of this application. So here we can see in the homepage, we have these different technology terms and we have their interpretations over here. And we have the option to edit and delete this content. So if I click on edit, we can see that we are in the edit page and we have the details auto-filled over here. And we can go ahead and change the details over here. I'll just add some text so that we can know that it is updated. And we can just click on this update interpretation button. So let's click on it. And here we can see we have this text updating. And after it has been updated, we can see that the updated text is displayed over here. And then we also have the option to delete one of these interpretations. So let's go ahead and click on delete for this first term. And now we can see that the first technology term has been deleted. And the same way you can go ahead and edit any of these terms and also delete them. And then we have this button called add new. So let's click on it. And here we have the option of adding a new interpretation. So let's go ahead and add something over here. I'll just type CSS. And here let's add cascading style sheet. And I'll just go ahead and click on add interpretation. And now we can see that the new content is displayed over here. So that's basically how this web app works. Right, I have created this folder called AppWrite CRUD and I just opened it with VS Code. Now let's go ahead and create our next application. So let's open the terminal. We can just go over here to view and click on terminal. And here let's go ahead and type the command npx create next app at latest. And let's add a dot over here to add the app in this current directory. So let's press enter. And here let's select TypeScript. And we'll also select ESLint. We'll also use Tailwind CSS. And we'll just select no for source directory. And let's select yes for app router. And I'll just select no for customizing the default import alias. And now we can see that the next app is being created. Alright, our next application has been created. So let's just type npm run dev and we'll be able to access this website. So I'll just open this link. And this is how the default Next.js homepage looks. So let's go back and let's go to the app directory. And here we have this page.tsx file. And this is all the code that is being displayed over here. So let's go ahead and delete all of this. So I'll just delete everything inside the return. And I'll just add a simple div. And I'll just type hi over here. And I'll just remove this import of the image. And now let's go back. And here we can see hi is being displayed. But we have this black background color over here. So if you go back, if you go to the global.css file, here we have some default CSS styles. So I'll just go ahead and delete all of this. I'll just keep these 3 lines of CSS for the Tailwind CSS. And now we can see we have our text displayed over here and we don't have any default CSS. Right now let's start with this header. Now for the header, we will use the layout.tsx file. Now that's because we're going to need this header in the other pages as well. So if you go to add new page, we have the same header over here. If you go to the edit page, here also we have the header displayed. So we need to add this header to all the pages. So instead of adding it to all the pages separately, let's go ahead and add it to the layout.tsx file. So it will be added to all the pages. So here we have the body tag and in that we have the children. So this children is basically everything that is displayed on the screen. So let's go ahead and create a div around these children. We have this div around these children. And now before the children, let's go ahead and add the header. And we will add the children inside a main tag. So let's create a main tag, and let's add the children inside this. Right now, let's go ahead and start with the header design. So in the header, we need to have a link for this home page. So let's create a link element, and I'll just import it from next link. And let's add the href, and let's set it to the home page. And here, let's just type tech interpretations. And then we need to have another link, and this link is gonna be for this add new page. So let's type href, and the link of the add new page will be create. And here let's type add new. And now if you go back to our page, this is how it looks. We have these two links over here. Now let's go ahead and style this. So here for the header, let's add some classes. So I'll just type class name, and we're going to use Tailwind CSS classes for this. So let's type padding of 6, and let's set the border to border bottom. Let's go ahead and set the display to flex, and justify content to space between. So let's type justify between. And now we can see that we have this text on the left side and this one on the right side. And let's go ahead and add a background color of blue 500. And let's set it to rounded large. And we'll just have rounded corners for the bottom left and bottom right. So I'll just type rounded BLLG and rounded BRLG for bottom right and bottom left. And now if you go back, this is how the header looks. Now let's go ahead and add a max width to this. So let's add it to this container division. And here let's type class name, and let's type max W of 3XL. And let's type MX auto to bring it to the center horizontally. And I'll just set the text color to slate 800. And now let's style this. So this link over here, so let's type class name, and let's set the text size to 2XL, and let's set the font to bold, and text to white color. Right now let's style this button. So here we have this link, so let's type class name, and let's set the background color to BG slate 100. And let's set it to grid, place items center to bring the content, which is the text, to the center. And let's add some padding. So I'll just have padding top and bottom of 2, and padding left and right of 4. And let's set rounded to full, and let's set the font to bold, and let's add a shadow of medium. And with that, we have styled the add new button. Right now let's go back, and here for the main, let's add some classes. So I'll just type class name, and let's add a padding of 4, and let's set the text to large. Right now let's go ahead and design this section right here. So let's go to the page.tsx file, and here I'll just create a div. And in this, first of all, we will have a div for this term. So let's create a div, and let's just add this term right here. So I'll just copy this and paste it over here. Later we will go ahead and dynamically fetch this from AppWrite, and here we can see we have the text displayed. Let's style it. So I'll just type class name, and let's set the font to bold, and let's go ahead and add some styling to this container division. So let's type class name, and let's set the padding to 4. Let's set the margin top and bottom to 2, and let's type rounded medium and border bottom, and let's type leading of 8. Now this is basically the line height. So this is how it looks. Right now we need to add the interpretation. So let's create another division over here, and I'll just go ahead and copy this text from here, and let's paste it over here. And here we can see we have the text displayed, and I think this is not in the center exactly vertically. So let's go back, and here in the layout.tsx file, in the header, let's also type items center to align it to the center vertically. And now it is exactly in the center. Right now let's go ahead and create these two buttons over here. So Let's go to the page.tsx file and let's go outside this div and let's create a div, and in this we'll create a link, and let's import the link from next link, and let's tap href, and this is for the edit page, so I'll just type edit over here, and here let's tap edit, and here we have this edit button, and let's go ahead and add the styles over here. So I'll just type class name bg slate 200 for the color, and let's add a padding left and right of 4, padding top and bottom of 2, and let's tap rounded of medium, and let's set it to uppercase and text to small, and let's set the font to bold and tracking to widest. So tracking is basically the letter spacing, and this is how the edit button looks. Right now let's go ahead and create a button for deleting the term. So let's create a button over here, and let's add some class names over here. First of all, we need to set the background color to red 500, and let's set the text color to white, and I think everything else will be the same. So I'll just copy these styles from here and let's paste it over here, and here we have this delete button. So let's add the text delete, and here we have this delete button. Right now let's go ahead and style the container division. So this is the division. I'll just tap class name and let's set it to flex, and let's set the gap to 4, and let's set the margin top to 4 and justify to the end so that it is on the right side. So now we can see we have the edit and the delete buttons displayed over here. And now we can go ahead and add a map before this div, and we can go ahead and loop through all the terms and dynamically display all the content over here. So for now I'll just keep it as it is, and this is the design of the home page. Right now let's create the create page. So let's go to the app folder and let's create a new folder called create, and in that we need to create a file called page.tsx, and let's tap export default function, and I'll just call it create new or create page, and let's return a div for now. I'll just tap create page, and if you go back and if I click on this add new button, we can see that the create page is being displayed over here. So now let's start creating this page. So we have this heading over here. Let's delete all of this, and let's create an h2, and let's tap add new interpretation, and let's style this. So let's tap class name text size to 2XL, font to bold, and margin top and bottom of 8. Right now let's create a form. In this form we will have the input fields. So let's create an input field, and the type will be text, and let's add the name and let's set it to term, and let's add a placeholder and let's set it to term, and let's add some classes. So I'll just type class name, and let's set the padding top and bottom of 1, padding left and right of 4, border, and rounded medium. So this is the input field. Now let's style the form, and let's set some classes over here. So let's tap flex, and let's set the gap to 3, and let's tap flex column to set the flex direction to column. And now we have this input field with full width. Right now let's create a text area. So I'll just tap text area, and for the name let's tap interpretation, and I'll just remove the ID and column, and for the rows I'll just set it to 4, and let's add a placeholder, and let's tap interpretation, and let's add some classes. So I'll just tap class name. Let's set the padding top and bottom of 1, padding left and right of 4, border, rounded medium, and let's set the resize to none so that the user is not able to resize the text area. And here we have this text area. Right now let's create this button. So let's create a button, and let's add the text add interpretation, and let's add some classes. So let's tap class name, and let's set the background color to black, text color to white. Let's set the margin top to 5, padding left and right of 4, padding top and bottom of 1, rounded medium, and let's set the cursor to pointer. And here we have this button. And that's it with the UI of the create page. Now let's create the UI of the edit page. So the edit page is basically almost the same as the create page. So here we just need to change this text to edit interpretation, and we need to add the text update interpretation over here. So let's go back and let's create another folder over here called edit. Now for editing this, we need to add it inside another folder, because here we can see that when we edit this content, we have the ID displayed over here. So we can see that it ends with F9. If we go ahead and open another term, here we can see we have another ID. It ends with 3C. So the content is displayed based on the ID that we have over here in the URL. So for that, we need to go ahead and create another folder over here, and we need to add it inside square brackets, because these are going to be dynamic, and let's call it ID. And let's create another file over here called page.tsx, and here we can add the code for the edit page. So let's tap export, default function, edit page, and let's return a div for now. I'll just tap edit page, and now let's go ahead and go to edit page, and let's add some random ID over here. And here we have the edit page. Now the design is almost the same, so let's go ahead and go to the create page, and let's copy this div from here, and let's paste it over here, and let's go ahead and change this to edit interpretation, and let's change the text of the button to update interpretation, and this is the edit page. And with that, we have created the design of the edit page, and we have completed creating the UI of our application. Now the first thing we will do is we will create an AppWrite project. So you can just go over here to cloud.appwrite.io and create a free account and log into the account, and you will be greeted with this screen right here. So let's click on create project, and let's name our project. I'll just name it AppWrite CRUD, and let's click on next, and let's select the default option, and let's click on next. And now we can see that our project has been created. So we have this project named AppWrite CRUD. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to add a platform. So if you're developing for an app, you can just add the app over here. So you can add Flutter, Android, and Apple. But we are developing for web. So let's click on web. And here let's name the web app. I'll just name it AppWrite CRUD. And here we need to type localhost, because we are working on localhost right now. So let's click on next. And then here we can see it says we need to install AppWrite. So let's go back to our project, and let's open the terminal, and I'll just close the server, and let's type npm install AppWrite, and let's press enter. And AppWrite has been installed. So let's go back and let's click on next. And now we can see it says we need to add this code to initialize the SDK. So let's copy it, and let's go back to our code, and let's go outside the app folder. So we'll go to the root of our application, and let's create a folder called lib, and in that we'll create a file called AppWrite_client.ts, and let's paste the code over here, and we need to import client from AppWrite. So let's go ahead and type import client from AppWrite. Right, now let's go ahead and export this client so that we can use it in other files. So let's tap export default client, and I'll just store these values inside an environment variable. So let's go to the root of our project, and let's create a new file called .env. And first of all, let's go to the git ignore, and let's add this file over here. So we don't want to push this env file to the GitHub repo, so I'll just add it over here. And now let's go ahead and copy this right here, and let's paste it over here. I'll just name the value next_public_AppWrite_endpoint, and let's paste the value over here. And then we have the project ID. So let's tap next_public_AppWrite_project ID, and let's copy this, and let's paste it over here. Right, now let's go ahead and use this. So here I'll just type process.env dot next underscore public underscore AppWrite underscore endpoint. Now TypeScript is giving me this error, so we need to type as string over here. And let's do the same for the project ID. So I'll just copy this and let's type process.env.project ID as string. And with this we have made the connection to the AppWrite project. Now let's go back to AppWrite and let's create a database. So let's click on next and let's go to the dashboard and let's go over here to databases and let's create a new database, and I'll just call it AppWrite CRUD DB, and let's click on create, and we can see that the database has been created. Now we need to use this database ID as well, so let's copy this and let's create a new environment variable called next underscore public underscore AppWrite database ID, and let's paste it over here. And now let's go ahead and create a collection, and let's name the collection interpretations, and even for the ID I'll just tap interpretations, and let's click on create, and we can see that the interpretations collection has been created. So now let's add the attributes. So let's click on create attribute and let's select string and let's name it term, and for the size I'll just set it to 100, or let's type 150, and let's make it required, and let's click on create, and let's create one more attribute and let's name it interpretation, and let's set the size to, let's try 255. So these are basically characters, and let's set it as required, and let's click on create. So both these attributes have been added. Now the ID is automatically added by AppWrite. Right, now let's go back to our project and let's start by creating the API. So let's create a new folder called API, and in this we'll create a new folder called interpretations, and in that we need to create a new file called route.ts, and I'll just go ahead and run this app. And now here the first thing we need to do is we need to import client from AppWrite client over here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's tap import client from AppWrite client. Right, now let's create a function for creating the interpretation. So I'll just create an async function and let's call it create interpretation. And here we will get some data. Now for the data type will be an object with term string and interpretation string. And let's create this function and let's add the code inside a try catch block. And here in the try, let's go ahead and create a const called response, and let's type await. And now we need to create an instance of databases from AppWrite. So here we need to type const database equals new databases, so we can import it from AppWrite. And here we need to pass the client, which you are getting from here. So here we need to type await database dot create document, and here we need to pass the database ID. So let's type process.env dot next public AppWrite database ID, and let's type as string. And the next thing we need to pass is the collection ID. So the collection ID is basically interpretations. So I'll just copy this and let's paste it over here. And the third thing we need to pass is the ID. Now for the ID we can use ID from AppWrite. So let's import it from AppWrite, and we can just type .unique and it will create a unique ID. And the last thing is the data. And now let's go ahead and return the response. And here in the catch, let's go ahead and type console.error. Let's type error creating interpretation, and let's pass the error over here, and let's throw new error, and let's type failed to create interpretation. Right, now let's create a function to fetch the interpretation. So I'll just copy this function and let's paste it down here. I'll just add a comment. So let's type create interpretation, and here let's type fetch interpretations. And here let's change the function name to fetch interpretations. And here we don't need to pass anything. And here in the try we need to type await database list documents. And here we need to pass the database ID, the collection ID, and we'll also display the data in descending order by created date. So we need to add it inside an array, and let's type query, and let's import it from AppWrite dot order descending. And here we need to pass the value. So AppWrite automatically creates this value called $symbol created at. So let's use that, and let's return the response. Now in the response it will give us documents, so let's return the documents. So let's type response.documents, and here in the error let's type error fetching interpretations, and here let's type failed to fetch interpretations. Right, now let's create the post and the get function. So we need to type export async function post, and we get a request, and it is of type request. And here let's add a try catch block. Now here from the request we will get the term and the interpretation. So let's type const, and let's destructure it. So let's type term interpretation from request.json, and we need to await this, and let's store these inside a const called data. So let's type term interpretation, and let's go ahead and call this function called create interpretation. So let's type const response equals await create interpretation, and let's pass the data, and let's go ahead and return a next response dot json, and here let's type message. Let's type interpretation added or created, and here in the error let's type return next response dot json error failed to create interpretation. And let's also send a status code. So let's type status of 500. Right, now let's write the get function. So let's type export async function get, and here let's add a try catch block, and here let's type const interpretations equals await, and let's call this function called fetch interpretations, and let's return next response dot json, and we'll just return these interpretations. So just type interpretations, and here in the catch let's type return next response dot json error failed to fetch interpretations, and let's also send a status code of 500. Right, now let's go ahead and check whether this works. So for this we will be using Postman. So you can download this application called Postman, and you can check the API routes over here. So let's click on this plus icon, and here let's type http localhost, and our application is hosted at port 3001, and then we have API, and in that we have interpretations. So here we can see we have API, and in that we have interpretations, and in that we have the route.ts file. So let's go ahead and try the post method. So let's change this to post, and here in the body let's select row, and here let's select JSON, and let's add the details over here. So we need to pass the term and the interpretation. So let's type term, and I'll just type CSS and interpretation, and let's add something over here, styling language, and let's go ahead and click on send, and let's see whether this works. And we have this error failed to create interpretation. So let's go back to our source code, and let's go to the terminal, and here we have this error, and here we can see it says the current user is not authorized to perform the requested action. So for that you need to go back to AppWrite, and you need to go over here to settings, and let's scroll down, and you need to add the permissions over here. So let's click on this plus icon, and for now I'll just go ahead and select any, and let's add these permissions over here, and let's click on update, and now let's see whether this works. So let's go back to Postman, and let's send this request, And now we can see it says interpretation created. And let's go back to AppWrite, and let's go to documents, and let's reload this page. And we can see that the document has been added. We have CSS and this interpretation added over here. So the post method is working all right. Let's add one more data. So here, let's change this to AppWrite. And here let's type backend as a service. So let's go ahead and send this. And let's go back. Let's reload this page. And here we can see that both the data has been added. And now let's see whether the get method is working. So let's go over here to get, and let's change this to none. And let's click on send. And here we can see we have this response. We have the first object where we have the term interpretation. And then we have the ID and created at, updated at, and all these values over here. Let's scroll down and we have CSS. So the get method is also working all right. Right now let's go back and let's create the API routes for edit and delete. Now for edit and delete, we need to get the ID as a parameter. So for that, let's go to interpretations and let's create a new folder called ID, and it will be inside square brackets because this is going to be dynamic. And in this we'll create a file called route.ts. And here also we need to add almost the same code. So I'll just copy these two lines of import from here. And we don't need to have the ID and the query. So I'll just remove these. And let's go ahead and create an instance of databases. So I'll just copy this line of code and let's paste it over here. Right now let's create a function to fetch a specific interpretation. So let's type async function and let's call it fetch interpretation. And here we'll get the ID and it'll be of type string. And let's add a try catch. And here in the try, let's type const interpretation equals await database dot get document. And here we need to pass the database ID, the collection ID, and the ID. So let's copy these two and let's paste it over here. And then we need to pass this ID. So let's type ID over here. And let's go ahead and return interpretation. And here in the catch, let's type console.error, error fetching interpretation. And let's pass the error over here. And let's throw new error. Let's type failed to fetch interpretation. And let's go ahead and create a function for deleting the interpretation. So let's create a comment. Let's type delete a specific interpretation. And let's type async function delete interpretation. And let's pass the ID over here, which is of type string. And here let's type try catch. And here let's type const response equals await database dot delete document. And in this we need to pass the database ID, the collection ID, and the ID. So let's copy these and let's paste it over here. And let's go ahead and return the response. And here in the catch, I'll just copy these two lines of code and let's paste it over here. And let's type error deleting interpretation and failed to delete interpretation. And now let's go ahead and create one more for updating. So I'll just copy this and paste it down here. Let's change this to update. And let's change the function name to update interpretation. And here instead of delete document, we need to type update document. And here we need to pass the database ID, collection ID, and the ID. And then we also need to pass the data. So I'll just call it data and let's get it from here. So let's type data. And the data type will be object with term string and interpretation string. Right now let's go ahead and create the get, delete, and put functions. So let's type export default function get, and here we will get the request. So it will be of type request, and then we'll also get the ID from here. So for that we need to type params, and it will be of type params, ID of type string. So you need to add this code. So with this we will get the ID from the params. And here let's go ahead and add a try catch. And here let's type const id equals params.id, and let's go ahead and type const interpretation equals await, and let's call this function called fetch interpretation, and let's pass the id over here. And we are getting this error over here because we need to add async, and this will not be a default function. Right now let's go ahead and return a next response .json, and here just type interpretation. Right now let's go ahead and add the error message. So let's type return next response .json, and here let's type error failed to fetch interpretation, and let's also send the status code of 500. Right now let's go ahead and copy this, and let's create one for delete. So let's type delete over here, and here also we'll get the request and the params, and here we need to call the function delete interpretation, and I'll just go ahead and call it directly, and here I'll just send a message, and let's type interpretation deleted, and here in the error message let's type failed to delete, and now let's go ahead and copy it one more time for update. And for the update we need to use the put function, and for the update we'll also get the data in the request. So I'll just store the data inside this interpretation constant. So let's type await req.json, and now let's call the update interpretation function, which is this one right here. So let's type await update interpretation, and let's pass the id and the interpretation, and let's return a message. Let's type interpretation updated, and here let's type failed to update interpretation. And now let's see whether this works. So let's go back to Postman, and here let's go ahead and get the ID of AppWrite from here. So let's copy this ID and let's paste it over here after interpretations, and let's click on send. Now we can see that the AppWrite data is being displayed over here. And now if you go ahead and copy the ID of CSS, and if I paste it over here, and if I click on send, we get the CSS term displayed over here. So the get method is working alright for single interpretations. Now let's try the put method. So let's change this to put, and here we need to go to row, and here we need to add the data. So let's change this to CSS updated, and let's copy the interpretation and let's paste it over here, and here also I'll just type updated. So now this is the updated data. So let's click on send. Now we can see it says interpretation updated. So now let's go back to AppWrite, and if I reload this page, we can see that it says updated. So the data is updated. If you go back to Postman, and if you go over here to interpretations, and if I select get, we can see that the updated data is being displayed over here. So the put method is working alright. Now the last thing we need to check is the delete method. So let's delete this AppWrite interpretation from here. So I'll just copy this ID and let's paste it over here, and let's select the delete method, and I'll just set this body to none, and let's click on send. And now we can see it says interpretation deleted, and if I go back over here and if I select get and click on send, we can see that we have just one term over here. So if you go back to AppWrite, here we can see that AppWrite was deleted from this collection. So the delete method is also working alright. And with that we have completed creating the API of our application. So you can also add API interpretations over here, and you will get this data over here. Alright, here I am in the source code, and let's start by writing the code for the home page. So here we can see in the home page we have all these tech interpretations displayed over here. Right now if we go to our AppWrite database, and if you open this collection, we can see that we have this one term over here, and let's go ahead and add some terms over here. So I'll just click on create document, and I'll just copy some of these from here. So I'll just copy this, and let's paste it over here for the term, And for the interpretation, let's copy this and let's paste it over here. We are doing this directly in AppWrite so that we can get some data to display on the home page. Later we will add the functionality to add it using a form. So let's go ahead and click on Next and create. And this term has been created. Let's create one more. And let's copy this one right here. And let's paste it over here. And let's copy this interpretation and let's paste it over here. And let's click on Next, Create. Right, so we have 3 interpretations displayed over here. Now let's go ahead and display them in the home page. So for that, let's go back to our home page. And this is the home page. We have this page.tsx file. And right now we have hard-coded this data over here. So the first thing we will do is we will create some states. So let's tap const and let's create a state for interpretations. So let's tap interpretations. And let's tap set interpretations. And here let's tap equals use state. And let's import it from React. And for the type, we need to set it to an array of interpretations. So let's go ahead and create an interface for that. So I'll just tap interface. And let's call it INterpretations. And here let's type $ID. So it will have this ID with a type of string. And then it will have the term with the type of string. And then it will have interpretation with a type of string. So this is how the interpretation data will look. So let's go ahead and add that type over here. So here let's type INterpretation array. Now since we are using use state, we need to change this component into a client component. So here we need to type use client. And now let's create another state. And this will be for checking whether the interpretations are loading. So let's type is loading. And let's type set is loading equals use state. And by default, we will set it to true. Right now we'll create a use effect, and in that we will write the code to fetch the interpretations. So let's type use effect, and it will be triggered when the page loads. So in that we'll create an arrow function, and we need to have a dependency array. So I'll just set it to an empty array, and we need to import this from React. So here we can see import use effect from React, and here let's create a function called fetch interpretations. And it will be an async function. And here the first thing we will do is we will set the is loading state to true, and then we will use a try catch block. And here let's create a const called response, and we will type await fetch, and we need to call the API that we created in the last video. So we have this API called API interpretations, and in that we have this route.ts file where we are getting the interpretations. And if we scroll down here, we can see we have this get method, and here we are just returning the interpretations. So let's go back and let's fetch the interpretations by typing /API/interpretations, and this will give us the interpretations data. And here first of all, let's check whether the response is okay. So let's type if exclamation response. So if the response is not okay, then we need to type throw new error, and here let's type failed to fetch interpretations. And then let's go ahead and store the JSON of the result into a constant, and I'll just call it data equals await response, which we are getting from here, .json. And then let's store this JSON data to this interpretations state. So let's type set interpretations data, and here in the catch let's type console.log error, and I'll just print this error. And then let's add a finally, so this will run at the end even if you have an error. So here let's type set is loading, and let's set it to false. So once all the interpretations have been fetched, we'll just set the loading state to false. Alright, now let's go ahead and call this function. So let's type fetch interpretations. Now let's create one more state for the error. So here I'll just type const, and let's type error, set error equals use state, and by default it will be null, and the type will be string or null. And here in the catch we'll also set the error. So let's type set error, and let's set it to failed to load interpretations. Please try reloading the page. Right, now let's scroll down, and here we need to add all of this inside so that we can loop through all the interpretations and display them one by one. So the first thing we will do is we will create a paragraph for the error. So I'll just type curly braces, and here let's type error ampersand ampersand. So this code after this ampersand will run only if the error is set to some value. So here let's create a paragraph tag, and here I'll just type error. So it will display this error right here. And I'll just go ahead and add some classes. So I'll just type class name, and let's set the top and bottom padding to 4, and I'll just set the text color to red 500. Right, now let's add all of this inside another curly braces. So let's cut all of this and let's paste it in here. And here, first of all, we will check whether it is loading. So if it is loading, then it will have this state set to true. So let's type is loading question mark, and if it is loading, then I'll just create a paragraph, and I'll just type loading interpretations, and let's add this inside parenthesis. And now here let's add an else, so we can just type colon, and then we have this division. Now here in this container division, we will loop through all the interpretations, and we will display this HTML. So let's do that. Here let's add this inside curly braces, and let's type interpretations dot map. Now for each of the interpretations, I'll just call it interpretation, and here we'll just return some JSX. So let's create parentheses, and here we will add the HTML. So I think we need to add this division as well inside the map, because this is, I think, the container division of each of these terms. So let's add this division inside the map, and let's close the division over here. And now we need to add this HTML inside this division. So let's copy this. So we need to copy all of this, and I'll just cut it and paste it over here. Right, now let's go ahead and delete these class names from here. So now let's go ahead and replace these values with the values from the interpretation. So let's go ahead and type curly braces interpretation dot term, and we need to add a key for each of the map elements. So here let's type key, and let's set it to interpretation dot $ID, and here instead of this text, let's type curly braces, and here let's type interpretation dot interpretation. And now let's go ahead and save this, and let's go back to our website. And now we can see that all the interpretations are displayed over here. So if you go back to AppWrite, and if I just change some things over here, so if I just change this data to updated, and let's click on update. And now if you go back and if you reload this page, we can see that updated is being displayed over here. So we are indeed getting the data from AppWrite. Now let's go back, and here we have this edit button, and this is basically a link. Now here for the link, we need to pass the ID as well. Now we need to pass the ID as a parameter. So here I'll just change this into backticks, and here let's type / curly braces, and here we need to type interpretation dot $ID. So now if you go back and if we hover over this, we can see that the ID is being displayed after the edit in the URL. So if I click on edit, here we can see that the ID is being displayed and it ends with 1B. Now if we go back and if we open this term right here, so if I click on edit, we have another ID. So the edit URL is working all right. Now the last thing we will do in this video is we will make this delete button work. So here we have this delete button. So let's create a function for deleting the data. So here let's type const handle delete. Now this is going to be an async function. So let's type async over here, and we'll get a parameter and it'll be an ID. and it will be of type string. Now if you take a look at this API, we can see that we have this API, and in that we have the interpretations, and in that we have this dynamic route ID. So we can pass the ID of the term that we want to delete, and it will be deleted. So if you go to this route.ts file, and if you scroll down here, we can see that for the delete we are accepting this params and we are getting the ID. So let's go back and let's pass the ID. So let's add a try catch block, and here let's type await, and let's type fetch, and here for the URL let's type backticks API interpretations / and we need to pass the ID. So we'll get the ID in this handle delete function over here. So let's type $ curly braces ID, and here we need to pass the method as well. So let's type method and let's set it to delete. Now with this fetch call, the interpretation will be deleted. Now let's also update the UI. So for that I'll just type set interpretations, which is this state that we have over here, and I'll just type prev interpretations for the previous values. You can name this anything you want, and here we can just type prev interpretations dot filter, and here let's type I for the ID, and here let's type I dot $ID is not equal to ID. Now what this line of code will do is that it will see which of the interpretations has the ID that we provided over here, and it will just filter out that and display the rest of the interpretations. Right now here in the catch, let's go ahead and type set error, and let's set it to failed to delete interpretation, and let's type please try again. Right now let's go ahead and call this handle delete function. So let's go to the button, and here in the button let's go ahead and add an on click, and here I'll just type handle delete, and I'll just pass the ID. So let's type interpretation dot $ID. Right now let's go back to the app and let's see whether it works. So let's click on this delete button, and now we can see that the term has been deleted. So if you go to the AppWrite collection, and if I reload this page, so if you go over here to interpretations, here we can see we just have these two terms. So let's go back and delete one of these as well, and now we can see we have just one of these terms. And if you go back over here, and if I reload this page, here we can see we have just one term, and if you go back and if we reload this page, we have just one term, and if I delete this as well, we have nothing over here, and here also we don't have anything. So when we don't have any interpretations, I'll just display a message called no interpretations found. So let's go back, and here instead of directly adding this div, I'll just type interpretations dot length is greater than 0, and if it is greater than 0, then we'll just display this div. And let's scroll down, and I'll just add an else, and let's add parenthesis, and let's create a paragraph, and let's type no interpretations found. And now we can see it says no interpretations found. But if we add a new interpretation over here, so just copy this one, and let's click on next and create. And now if you go back, here we have the interpretation displayed, but if you don't have any, then it will display no interpretations found. Now let's go back to our code editor, and I think we have an error over here. So here we can see we have this error. So if we scroll up, here we need to change this to an array, and now we can see we don't have any errors. And I'll also change the name of the interface to just interpretation. So I'll just change this over here as well. Right now we don't have any errors, and if you go back, everything is working as expected. Alright, so that's basically it with the home page of our app. Right now if I click on this add new button, we have this page over here. So we have already created the UI of this page. So let's go back to our source code, and if you go to this create folder, and if you go to this page.tsx file, here we have the UI of our create page. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to create some states to store these data. So let's go back, and here let's go ahead and create a state for form data, and let's type set form data, and let's set it equal to use state. and we'll just import it from React. Now by default this will contain an object with term and interpretation. So by default we will set these two values to blank, and since we are using useState, we need to change this to a client component. So let's type use client. Right now let's create a couple more states. So let's type const and let's create a state called is loading, and let's type set is loading equals use state, and by default we'll just set it to false. And let's create one more state for the error. So let's type const error set error equals use state, and it will be of type string or null, and by default we'll just set it to null. Right now let's create a function to update the form data. So let's create a function called handle input change, and here we'll get a parameter. I'll just call it e, and here we need to store the data. So let's type set form data. Now since we have added this as an object, we need to go ahead and first of all get all the previous data. So I'll just call it prev data. Right now let's go ahead and type parenthesis, and here we need to create an object, and first of all we'll just extract everything that we already have. So let's type dot 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 prev data, and then we need to type square brackets e.target.name colon e.target.value. So what this will do is it will first of all extract all the data that we already have. So it will get the term and the interpretation, and after that we need to update one of these values. So we're going to take a look at the variable that we get over here. So if you scroll down, here we can see we have the input field, and in that we have this name, and this name term will be replaced by this, and then we'll just get the value that we have over here. So here I'll just create a value attribute, and here let's type form data dot term. So it will get this value and store it over here. So if you make changes to this term, it will update the term, and if you make changes to the interpretation, it will update it over here. So we are updating both the data inside this single form data state. So let's scroll down, and here also I'll just add a value, and let's type form data dot interpretation. Now when there is any change in these input fields, we need to call this function right here, handle input change. So let's type on change, and here let's type handle input change, and let's do the same over here for the text area. So I'll just copy this and I'll just paste it over here. And now let's scroll up, and here we have this error. So we need to add the type. So let's type colon, and we'll set the type to change event, and here let's type HTML input element or HTML text area element. So now we don't have any errors. Now I'll just go ahead and console.log the form data so that we know that it is working alright. So let's type form data, and let's go back to our website, and let's open the console. And here if you just type testing, we can see that it is being displayed over here. So the data is being updated correctly. It is displayed over here as well. So now let's go back and let's remove this console log from here, and let's create the function to submit the data. And before that, let's go ahead and here, instead of just adding this text add interpretation, let's go ahead and add it inside a conditional statement. So here let's add curly braces, and let's type is loading. So if it is loading, then we'll just display adding, and if it is not loading, then we'll just type add interpretation. And we'll also disable the button when it is being loaded. So here let's type submit, and also let's type disabled equals is loading. So now what will happen is that if it is loading, then the button will be displayed, and it will also display this text adding. And here below this form, let's also create a paragraph for the error messages. So let's type error, which is a state that we created over here. And if we have an error, so let's type ampersand ampersand. And if you have the error, then let's create a paragraph, and here we'll just display the error. So I'll just type error over here, and let's add some class names. So let's type class name, and let's set the text to red 500, and margin top of 4. Right now let's scroll up and create the function called handle submit. So here let's type const handle submit equals async, and here we'll get some data and I'll just call it e, and for the type I'll just type react.form event. And here the first thing we will do is we'll prevent the default behavior, which is reloading the page. So I'll just type e.prevent default, and now let's go ahead and call this function when the form is submitted. So here for the form let's type on submit, and here let's call this function handle submit, and let's scroll up and let's continue writing this function. So the first thing we will do is if one of these values is empty, then we'll just display an error message. So let's type if exclamation form data dot turn or exclamation form data dot interpretation. So if one of these is not available, then let's set the error to please fill in all the fields, and I'll just go ahead and return. So the rest of the code of the function will not be executed. So now let's go back and let's click on add interpretation button, and we can see we have this error, please fill in all the fields. So let's go back, and here if we have both the data, then we'll just go ahead and set the error to null, and I'll just set the is loading state to true. So it should start loading from here, so it will display the adding message over here. And now let's create a try catch block, and first of all I'll just go ahead and in the catch I'll just type console.log error, and let's type set error, and let's set the error to something went wrong, please try again, and let's add finally. So this will run even if we have an error, and we'll just set the is loading state to false. Right now let's go ahead and start writing the code for the try. So if you go back over here to API, we have created this API route called API interpretations, and in that we have this route, and here we can see we have this post function. So we need to pass the data over here. So let's type const response equals await fetch, and let's type API interpretations, and for the method let's type post, and then we need to add headers, and I will just set it to content type of application JSON, and then let's add the body. Now for the body we need to parse it into JSON, so let's type JSON dot stringify, and let's just pass this form data over here. So we have this form data over here, so I'll just type form data, and now let's go ahead and check whether the response is not okay. So let's type if exclamation response dot okay, then we'll just go ahead and throw a new error, and let's type failed to create interpretation, and if everything goes alright, we'll just go back to the home page. So for that we need to use the router. So let's scroll up, and here I'll just type router equals use router, and let's import it from Next navigation, and let's scroll down, and here we need to type router dot push, and let's provide the link of the home page. And with that I think we have completed the code for adding the interpretation. So let's go back to our website, and let's try adding a new interpretation. So I'll just type Google Chrome, and let's type a web browser, and now let's click on add interpretation, and we can see that we have been redirected to the home page, and we have the new data over here. And if you go back to AppWrite, and if I reload this page, here we can see that Google Chrome is being displayed. So the add functionality is working alright. Right here I'm in the source code, and let's go to the edit page. So we have already created this page for edit, and we need to add the functionality of edit over here. So here we can see we have this folder called edit, and in that we have this dynamic ID. So here we can see the ID is being displayed over here in the URL, and the ID is based on the post that we click. So if we click on edit on this term right here, then it will have a different ID. So for each of these posts we will have different IDs. So now the first thing we will do is we will populate these input fields with the details of this ID. So for example, if I click on edit on this term Google Chrome, and if I click on edit over here, then here we should have the text Google Chrome displayed, and then we'll be able to update it over here. So let's do that. Let's go back and let's go to the edit page. So let's scroll up and let's go ahead and create a state for storing the term and the interpretation. So if you go to the create page, here we can see that we have already created some code for that. So I'll just copy this code from here. So we need to have the form data state, we need to have the is loading state, and also the error state. So let's copy these 3 lines of code and let's paste it over here. And now we need to import use state. So let's import it from React. Now since we are using use state, we need to change this component into a client component. So I'll just type use client over here. Alright, now let's go ahead and use a use effect, and this will be triggered after the page loads. So let's go ahead and create an arrow function over here, and we need to have a dependency array over here for the next parameter. So I'll just provide an empty array over here, and here let's go ahead and create a function called fetch data, and it'll be an async function. Now here let's add a try catch block, and here in the catch I'll just type set error, and let's set the error to failed to load interpretation. And now in the try, let's go ahead and type const, and I'll just call it response. And we need to hit this API route called API interpretations, and we need to pass this ID. So if you go over here to this route.ts file, which is inside this dynamic route, here we can see that if we take a look at the get function, we are getting the params over here, and from that we are getting the ID, and using the ID we are fetching a specific interpretation. So if we scroll up, if you go to this function called fetch interpretation, here we can see that we are getting the document with the help of the ID. So it will return this single interpretation over here. So let's go back, and here let's type await fetch, and let's type API, and I'll just use backticks for this. So let's type /API /interpretations / and here we need to add the params. So now here we can see that we are getting the params over here. So if we go back here, we are getting the params in the URL. Now to get that, we need to write some code over here. So here we need to type params, and the type will be params with ID of type string. So this will be the type. Right now let's go ahead and type $ curly braces, and let's type params dot ID. So this will make a fetch call to this API interpretations / the ID which we see over here, and it will get a response of that specific term. So now let's go ahead and type if the result is not okay, then we'll just throw a new error, and I'll just type failed to fetch interpretation. And if everything is okay, then we'll just go ahead and store the JSON inside a constant, and I'll just call it data equals await response, which you are getting from here. So let's type response dot JSON. And now we simply need to update this form data state. So let's type set form data, and here let's type term. So we need to have a term in here, and for the term we'll just type data dot term, and then we need to have the interpretation. So let's type interpretation, and let's set it to data dot interpretation. So now this will store the data that we get from this API call to this state, and now let's scroll down, and here let's go ahead and add the value of this state. So here let's go ahead and type value equals form data dot term, and here for the text area let's type value equals form data dot interpretation, and let's also add an on change listener over here. So here we need to type on change, and we'll create a function called handle input change, And here also let's type on change, handle input change. And I think we have created this function in the create page. So I'll just copy this function from here. And let's go ahead and paste it over here. And let's import change event from React. Right now, to display the data over here, we need to call this function fetch data. So let's call it over here, fetch data. And now let's go back and let's reload this page. And the data is not being displayed over here. So let's go ahead and console.log this data and let's see what we get. So let's type console.log data. And let's go back and let's open the console. And I'll just reload this page. And here let's see what data we are getting. So we are getting interpretation, and in that we are getting the term and the interpretation. So here we need to type data dot interpretation dot term, and we need to do the same for here. So data dot interpretation dot interpretation. So now let's go back and let's reload this page. And now we can see that the data is being populated over here. So let's go back and let's open another term. So let's open this one right here. So I'll just click on edit. And here we can see we have Google Chrome and a web browser displayed over here. So the data is being fetched correctly. Alright, now let's go ahead and add the functionality of editing this data. So let's go back and let's create a function called const handle submit equals async. And here for the argument, I'll just give it a type of react.form event. And here, the first thing we will do is prevent the default behavior. So let's type e.prevent default. And let's go back to the create page and let's see whether we can copy anything from here. So I think we can copy almost all of this code. So let's copy this. And let's go back to the edit page and I'll just paste it over here. And here we have the router. So we need to create a router over here. So I'll just type const router equals use router. And let's import it from next navigation. And then here for the fetch call, we need to change this to the edit method. So here for the method, we need to type put. And here we need to pass the param. So here if you go to edit, so here we can see we have the put method. And for that we need to send the request and also the params in which we are sending the ID. So let's change this into backticks. And here let's pass the param. So let's type / curly braces params.id. And then here in the error, let's type failed to update interpretation. And I will just go back to the home page if it is successful. And here I'll just leave all this code as it is. And let's scroll down. And here we need to create an on submit. And let's call this function called handle submit. And let's scroll down, and here we need to change the text of the button. So I'll just copy the code from here. So I'll just copy this line of code and I'll just paste it over here. And I'll just change this to updating. And here let's type update interpretation. And let's also add the error message. So let's copy this line of code from here. And after the form, we need to add the error. I think that's it with the code of the edit page. So let's see whether it works. So let's go back. And here I'll just type updated. And here also let's type updated. And let's click on update interpretation. And here we can see that the data has been updated. So the edit method is working correctly. Let's update this one right here. So let's type updated. I'll just remove all of this and click on update. And we can see we have this error message. So let's bring this back in and let's type updated. And let's click on update. and we can see that it is also updated. So everything is working all right. And with that, we have completed creating this CRUD application using Next.js and AppWrite. Now before deploying this, let's go ahead and change this title. So for that, you have to go to your source code and you have to go to the layout file, and here you can change the title. So let's change this title to Tech Interpretations. So I'll just copy this and paste it over here. And now we can see that the title has changed. Now to deploy this to Vercel, the first thing we need to do is we need to create a Git repository. So you can go over here to your GitHub account and click on this create new button and click on new repository. And let's give it a name. So I'll just name it AppWrite CRUD. And then you can select public or private. I'll just select public, and let's click on create repository. And here we can see our repository has been created. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to run these commands. So first of all, we need to initialize the Git repository. So let's go back to our source code and let's go ahead and stop this server. So I'll just press Ctrl C and let's tap git init, and the Git repository has been initialized. Now let's go ahead and add all the files. So if you go to the git ignore file, here we can see that we have added this .env file inside the git ignore. So make sure to add this so that it is not pushed to your Git repository. And let's go ahead and type git add dot to add all the files. And now the next thing we need to do is git commit. So let's type git commit, and let's set the message to first commit, and let's press enter. And now the next thing we need to do is run these three commands. So I'll just copy these 3 lines of commands and let's paste it over here, and let's press enter. And we can see all the files have been pushed to GitHub. So now if we reload this page, here we can see all the files and folders are displayed. Now the next thing you need to do is go to Vercel, and if you don't have an account, you can just create a free account, and you can also log in with your GitHub account. And once you're logged in, you will find this screen right here, and then you have to go over here to add new and click on project. And the next thing you need to do is you need to import your Git repository over here. So our repository is named AppWrite CRUD. So I just search for it over here, AppWrite CRUD. And we can see that it is not being displayed over here. So let's click on configure GitHub app, and I'll just use my GitHub mobile app. And now here I'll just go ahead and select the repository. So I'll just click on select repositories, and let's search for AppWrite CRUD, and let's select it, and let's click on save. And now we can see that AppWrite CRUD is being displayed over here. So let's click on import, and we can see that it has auto detected that it is a Next.js project. And now we need to add the environment variables over here. So let's go back to our code and let's go to the env file, and let's copy all these 3 environment variables, and let's paste them over here. You can just click on the first input field and press Command V, and all the environment variables will be pasted over here. And now let's click on deploy, and here we can see that the building process has started. And here we can see our app has been deployed to Vercel. So now we can go ahead and click on this website, and this is the URL of our website. And we can see that all the data is being displayed over here. Let's add some new data. So I'll just type JavaScript, and let's type a programming language, and let's click on add interpretation. And here we can see that the interpretation was added. Let's click on edit, and let's see whether we are able to edit it, and let's click on update. And here we can see the data has been updated. Let's see whether we are able to delete this, and we can see that the delete is also working correctly. So the app is working alright. So that's basically how you can deploy your Next.js application to Vercel. Now you can go over here to the dashboard, and you can make some changes over here. So you can go over here to settings and go to domains, and here you can go ahead and edit the domain. And you can also add your custom domains over here, and here you can change the environment variables. So that's basically it for this video. If you have any doubts, you can ask in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.